put together a document called the Algebra of Life, and there's a link below to download the PDF if you should so wish to do that. Now, I've called it the Algebra of Life because one of the most amazing things that very few people seem to know is that modern physics has found that the total energy in the universe is exactly zero. So when people say, how can something come from nothing? Well, they're sort of wrong. It's how can nothing come from nothing? Because the universe in its sum total is zero. Anyway, with that in mind, I put this document together because ultimately, to answer some of the most important questions that we ask ourselves, we have to view what we are within this broader context. This broader context that ultimately there is nothing out there in total. Of course, it gets the zero gets divided into +1 and -1, but +1 and -1 still make zero. So when the ancient Hindus and similar people talk about the world being an illusion, they're kind of correct. But anyway, that isn't the main theme of this. What I'm going to do is read through the document. I suppose it will probably sound a little bit dry, but I may well embellish little bits that are not actually in the document, and it's probably going to be fairly long. So, these are the best answers I have found to perennial questions that haunt many people. Why is there suffering? That's one that particularly haunted me. What am I? What is my purpose? How do I attain freedom? What happens after death? What is a good life? The reasoning you're about to hear is not my own, although the synthesis of ideas probably is. I draw heavily on Schopenhauer and Spinoza. On the face of it, they don't have much in common in actual fact. Spinoza is quite heavily criticized by Schopenhauer in parts, and especially when Spinoza comes out with tautologies such as every effect has a cause. Well, of course it does. A cause is implied in the notion of an effect. Even so, Spinoza offers the best description of the emotional nature of man I've come across. And I did some training in Gestalt therapy, and my wife is a psychologist. But even so, Spinoza is the man when it comes to understanding the emotional nature of man and the drivers. So let's begin. What am I? The answer to this question is simpler than you might imagine, in actual fact. For any experience to take place, there must be a subject, the experiencer. You, me, any sentient creature that can experience, and any particular creature of that nature is the subject, the thing that experiences. And then we need objects, the things experienced, a table, a car, a piece of music, a thought. The object of experience can be anything that impinges itself on our consciousness. This includes physical objects, the sensations from our body, which is just another object really, and thoughts. Any object of perception is obviously not us. We in turn are the subject, the thing that experiences. The thing that is experienced is not us, the experiencer is what we are. Every night, most of us experience nothingness, in deep dreamless sleep. We can fall to sleep at 11 p.m. and awake at 7 a.m. and during that 8-hour period we simply did not exist as a conscious entity. If our sleep was dreamless, that is. As the nervous system shuts down, so we lose consciousness of external objects, and even our own bodies. And if we shut down even more, we become unaware of the mental processes taking place within us. In effect, all the objects have disappeared, external objects, our bodies, and even our thoughts and mental images. The same happens when we are put under by an anesthetic during an operation. One minute we see the anaesthetist inject the anesthetic, and then in the next instance we awaken to the sound of voices, with seemingly no elapsed time between the two events. Having had several operations in the past 10 years, I actually got to look forward to the anaesthetist actually injecting, trying to be aware as I fell off, but you can't. 1 minute you're there and next minute you're not. There can be no subject or experiencer if there are no things to experience. Obviously, if there's nothing to experience, what are you? You're nothing. You're the same as you are when you are in deep dreamless sleep or experiencing an anesthetic. That we come back to the same sense of me when we wake up is now fairly well understood. Our memory records events that give us a sense of the past, our own personal history. But it isn't just memory that gives us this feeling of continuity. When conscious, I definitely have the feeling this is me. Anthony Damasio, a Portuguese-American neuroscientist and university professor who takes Spinoza's notions of mind and body fairly seriously, claims that the brain effectively creates a map of the body. And it is this map that tells me every morning when I wake that this is me and not someone else that has awoken. The parts of the brain that perform this mapping can be damaged. In such situations, a person has no sense of being someone. So our sense of continuity and identity comes from memory and a map in the brain respectively. Again, the mental constructs created by our brains are objects, and the experiencer is you, the subject. So to answer the question, what am I? We simply have to ask what the experiencer is. And the answer to this seemingly simple question is that we can never know. The subject cannot look at itself. The subject is not an object. You, as an experiencer, are not an object, so you cannot look at yourself. You are not a thing. In the words of Schopenhauer, that which knows all things and is known by none is the subject. I'll read that again because it says it all. That which knows all things and is known by none is the subject. Since the subject is not an object, we cannot know it. The eye cannot look at itself, and so you can never know what you are. If you heard the barking there, I apologise. Our little dog, affectionately known as the barking little bastard. Anyway, back to this. So the next question, what happens after death? The answer to this should be fairly obvious by now. Since our brain and bodies die, along with all our sense organs, we no longer have objects to experience, and so, as in deep dreamless sleep, to all intents and purposes, we cease to exist. But Schopenhauer does give a hint on our state after death. We are nothing and everything. Having relinquished a limited captive state within the body, we go back to become part of the universal subject, which is not limited. For Schopenhauer, this infinite subject is the will to life, the universal subject that manifests in infinite creatures to experience finite objects. And so, for the individual, death is death, but as Socrates said, nothing is sweeter than deep, dreamless sleep. On to the next question. Why is there suffering? I'll divide this into two parts. Firstly, we live in a universe composed of an infinite number of things. These things interact with each other according to various laws. So the law of gravity says that if a tile slips from the roof of a building and hits you on the head, then it may well kill you or at least give you a bad headache. As bodies, we are just objects in a universe of objects, and if something happens that harms us, we suffer. That is the simple part. The second part of this is the way sentient creatures cause suffering to others, and this is more involved. Within every living creature is a will to life. Some might call it the survival instinct, or the conatus, as the ancients called it. Every creature is primarily driven by the drive for self-preservation, and various emotions motivate our behaviours in this respect, fear and pain being the most obvious. In the world of animals, this survival instinct requires that other creatures, both plant and animal, are killed and eaten. As such, the suffering of animals is built into the scenario they find themselves in. Schopenhauer says that the survival instinct is just part of the will to life, and is a blind evolutionary force that has no awareness, and has as much awareness, in fact, as the law of gravity. Reproduction is also a part of this will to life, and nature works so that only the fittest get to reproduce, generally anyway. And so we see violent clashes between males within a species for mating rights, and sometimes females also. That the will to life is unconscious is well demonstrated by the way animals treat each other, as if they were inanimate objects, and simply do not acknowledge each other's sentience. Within human beings, it all gets a little bit more complicated. While we have the will to life driving us on, it can become perverted because of our imaginative capability and intelligence. The emotions such as anger, hatred, envy, jealousy, and love are experienced by all animals, including man. When the will to life is threatened in some way, the negative emotions will arise. When the will to life is reinforced, then so-called positive emotions of joy, love, and excitement will come about. In many situations, human beings will become envious of a person who has something that is viewed as life-enhancing, for example. This envy knows no bounds and can develop into violence. Pride is another emotion, where one person will imagine they have superior capabilities and possessions to other people, and if in a position of power, will treat them badly. The real problem for human beings, however, is that they can create abstract concepts such as nation, religion, corporation, and so on. The will to life can then become identified with such abstractions, and if a nation is threatened, for example, then the members of that nation see it as a threat on themselves. Religious wars are another example, and so is the ruthless behavior of businesses. And so man not only causes other men to suffer by directly threatening their will to life, but it can also happen because of identification with abstractions. So suffering is built in. Men have the possibility to moderate the amount of suffering through the use of reason. Medicine and effective shelter are two ways to alleviate physical suffering, and the construction of a state with laws is a way to protect men from each other. However, reason is weak compared with the will to life, and so there will always be a battle between the forces of greed, exploitation, violence and bigotry, and their moderation through the power of the state. Having said all of this, the next question is, why not commit suicide? Well, I'm afraid there's a very functional answer to that. The suicide equation is very simple. A person commits suicide when the pain associated with living is greater than the force of the will to life. Schopenhauer, for example, concluded that life is cruel and vicious, although he did actually enjoy his own life. Had it become unbearable, then no doubt he would have at least considered suicide, as Gurdjieff did in actual fact. In ancient Rome and Greece, suicide was a matter of course. If things became too much, life was definitely tougher then, and so it was viewed as a fairly legitimate thing to do. What is my purpose? The next question. The notion of purpose is a wholly man-made thing. The universe has no notion of purpose, and it has no final cause, in other words, a goal towards which it is headed. If the universe had purpose, it would mean it was inadequate in some way, and would be striving to address that inadequacy. But how can the all have a notion of something that is outside itself? It just doesn't make sense. And because the universe has no purpose, neither do its constituent parts, you, me, the planet, our galaxy, and so on. However, because we are finite, we do need other parts of the universe to support our existence: food, money, shelter. And so at a purely human level, then we can have purposes which serve the aim of helping us persist in our existence. But our life does not have any intrinsic purpose. How can the parts have purpose when the whole does not? Some people find this distressing because we seem to be programmed to search for meaning. Obviously our ego needs to affirm itself in some way, but the fact that there is no purpose is actually a very liberating thing. It means we are part of something that is wholly free. So if we can rise above our own petty ego and identify with the all, then we can get a sense of that freedom. So, following straight on from that is, how do I attain freedom? You attain freedom by realizing that you have no freedom at all as a finite being. Every aspect of your life is driven by a chain of causality. You are programmed by your genetics, your parents, society, peers, and the will to live. Most of the great thinkers have reached the same conclusion, and modern science is showing that we are wholly conditioned beings. Gurdjieff said that man is a machine. Spinoza and Schopenhauer said that the notion of free will is nothing but a fantasy. Again, people can find this distressing, but when you realize that you are a wholly conditioned part of an unconditioned whole, then you can relax, and as the child's rhyme goes, row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. So finally, what is a good life? Well, the extent you can live a good life is wholly dependent on Lady Fortune. In other words, luck. Someone with a crippling, painful illness probably cannot live a good life, and that's the sad reality of it. They can compensate in some ways, but if you've got constant pain, then life's going to be tough. However, for most of us, the motto should be, never pay for pain with pleasure. In other words, it is fairly apparent that smoking, alcohol, excessive food consumption and so on are likely to lead to some form of disease and pain. So the pleasures associated with indulgence never exceed the pain that they might cause. Epicurus was probably the master of the good life. His lifestyle was simple, away from society, and he lived with like-minded people. He would grow his own food and considered a piece of cheese to be a banquet. Unfortunately, the rise of Christianity put an end to his garden idylls. Looking on with jealous eyes, the Christians destroyed the Epicurean movement, building places of misery, churches and monasteries, where there had once been a simple and pleasurable Epicurean way of life. The Epicurean way of life would be hard to follow today, but even so, simplicity is the key. At an emotional level, we need to be honest about our emotional nature with all its hatred, envy, sadness, obsessions, pride and so on. Once we can see the emotions in an honest way, then we just need to accept them and not judge and try to change them. In this way they lose force and are less troubling. And as someone once said to me, what we resist tends to persist. Well, that's it. It was quite a lot. Hence I produced a document, so that if you're so inclined you can mull over it. Anyway, thanks for listening.